Have you noticed what's happening lately? Management ignores everyone's complaints. They think the owner doesn't care, but nobody has ever seen him.
Then something happened that neither expected. That is interesting.
Take that filthy thing off my shelf before I throw it in the dumpster myself. Preston Vance said it loud enough for the whole calf to hear. He was pointing one manicured finger at a chipped blue enamel mug that sat on a little wooden shelf behind the register, the way a man points at garbage. And before anyone could move, before the old woman behind the counter could even raise her hand, he reached up and swept it off the shelf. The mug hit the tile floor and broke into 3 pieces. A small painted daisy, faded almost white, cracked clean in half. The woman did not cry out. Pearl Hutchins, 63 years old, 22 years on that counter, simply looked down at the broken pieces and then looked back up at him. Calm, steady. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "You don't know what that was." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A line of 7 customers stood frozen, coffee cups halfway to their mouths. A teenager near the window had already lifted her phone. And at the corner table, a man in a frayed gray coat set down his own cup, very slowly, halfway through a bite of a blueberry muffin. He did not say a word, but something behind his eyes had gone very still and very cold. Nobody in that store knew who he was. Preston Vance least of all. In about 40 minutes, Preston would learn, and when he did, the color would drain out of his face like water out of a cracked glass. Have you ever watched someone with power destroy something sacred, something that belonged to a person who couldn't fight back, just because they thought no one important was watching? Stay with me, because the man in the corner had built everything Preston Vance was standing in. And to understand what he did next, you have to go back 3 hours, to the morning when everything was still ordinary. Let me take you there. The store on 8th Street opened its doors at 5:40 every morning. 10 minutes before the chain officially required, because Pearl Hutchins had been opening it 10 minutes early for 22 years and saw no reason to stop now. She arrived in the dark. She always arrived in the dark. The bus from the east side dropped her 2 blocks away at 5:11, and she walked the rest, the same cracked sidewalk, past the shuttered shoe repair, past the laundromat with the buzzing sign, her keys already in her hand. She wore an apron she had ironed herself the night before. She ironed it the way some women iron a wedding dress, slow, careful, the steam rising, the creases pressed flat. It was just a green canvas apron with the Della's Coffee logo stitched on the chest. But Pearl pressed it like it meant something, because to her it did. You should understand what kind of woman she was. Pearl made $1,290 a month after taxes, and her rent was $1,100. She did the math at her kitchen table every Sunday with a pencil, the same pencil sharpened down to a stub. After rent there was $190 for everything else: electricity, the bus pass, food, the blood pressure pills she split in half to make them last, and a 16-year-old grandson named Marcus who slept on a fold-out couch in the front room because the apartment had 1 bedroom and Pearl had given it to the boy. Marcus's mother, Pearl's only daughter, had died 4 years earlier. Pearl did not talk about it much. She kept a photograph in her wallet, and she kept moving, because moving was the only thing that had ever held her together. She raised that boy on $190 of slack a month, and she never once let him see her count it. Every morning before she left, Pearl set out a bowl of cereal and a folded note for Marcus. The note always said the same thing: "Be good, be kind, I'll be home." She'd been writing that note since he was 12. She'd written it more than 1,000 times. The apartment had a leak in the front room ceiling that the landlord had been promising to fix for 2 years, and over the worst of it, Pearl had stretched a square of blue tarp held up by thumbtacks, so the water ran along the plastic and dripped into a coffee can instead of onto the couch where the boy slept. On rainy nights, she could hear it. Drip, drip. She'd learned to sleep through it the way you learn to sleep through anything when there's no money to make it stop. Her one luxury in all the world was a small radio on the kitchen counter that played gospel low while she pressed her apron, and a tin of butter cookies she allowed herself one of, on Sundays only, after she finished the math. She did not feel poor exactly. She would have told you she was rich in the things that hold. She had a grandson who said grace without being reminded. She had a job she was proud of. And she had a promise she had kept for 20 years, which is a kind of wealth that doesn't show up on a pay stub but holds a person upright through mornings that would bend a weaker back in half. That was the woman Preston Vance called a filthy things keeper. Remember her, because the world is about to remember her too. Now you have to understand the mug, because everything that mattered ran through that mug. On the shelf behind the register at the 8th Street store sat a blue enamel coffee mug chipped at the rim, with a small daisy hand painted on the side and 3 letters scratched into the bottom with the point of a kitchen knife DMR. It had been made in 1974. It was the first mug ever used at the first counter that ever became Della's Coffee, and the woman who had scratched those initials into the bottom, DMR Della Mae Reed, had been dead for almost 20 years. Della Mae Reed opened a coffee counter inside the old downtown bus depot in 1974. 11 stools and a hot plate, the year her husband walked out and left her with nothing but a baby and a temper and 2 strong hands. She ran that counter for 31 years. And from the very first morning she had one rule that she never broke, not once. Not in 3 decades. The rule was simple. Anybody who came to her counter and couldn't pay got a free cup. No questions. No lecture. No standing there proving how poor you were. You sat down, and a hot cup of coffee appeared in front of you, and Della would say the same 5 words every single time. Everybody gets a warm cup. She served it in whatever was clean, but the free cup. The one she'd hand to the soldier home from somewhere terrible, or the kid who'd run away from home, or the man who'd lost a job and couldn't tell his wife yet. That free cup, in Della's mind, was the whole point of the counter. The paying customers kept the lights on. The free cup was why God had given her the lights to keep on. When Della died, her counter had grown to 9 little shops across the city. Her son took those 9 shops, and over 20 years he built them into Della's Coffee, 1,400 locations in 31 states, $2 billion a year, the warm yellow logo you've passed 100 times. He named it after her. He put her rule in the company handbook on page 1, before the dress code, before the cash handling procedures, before anything. The rule had a name now. They called it the Blue Mug. Any customer who asked for the Blue Mug got a free cup of coffee, no questions, on the house, and the company ate the cost. It was supposed to be sacred. It was supposed to be everywhere. And the original mug, the actual 1974 mug with the daisy and the initials, sat on a shelf at the 8th Street store, which had been built on the exact spot where the old bus depot counter once stood. It was the closest thing the company had to a relic. Corporate had wanted to put it in a glass case at headquarters. Della's son had said no. He said it belonged where she'd used it. So it stayed on a little wooden shelf behind the register, and for 22 years. Pearl Hutchins dusted it every morning with the corner of her apron. But what Pearl didn't know, that ordinary morning, was that 200 miles away, a man was sitting in the back of a car in a frayed gray coat, deciding to come see for himself why something at his company had started to rot. His name was August Reed. He was 51 years old. He was Della Mae Reed's son. And he had not slept much in 3 weeks. It had started with a single email, forwarded to him by his assistant because she didn't know what else to do with it. A customer in the 8th Street neighborhood had written to complain. Not about cold coffee, not about slow service. The customer wrote that he had walked into a Della's, down on his luck, 3 days without a real meal, and had quietly asked the manager for the blue mug, the free cup, the thing the company put on billboards, the thing August's mother had built her life around, and the manager had laughed at him. In front of everyone. The manager had said, and the customer quoted it word for word, "We don't do that here. This is a business, not a soup kitchen." People like that need to move along. People like that. August had read those 3 words and felt something go cold in his chest. He had pulled the numbers himself that night, and the numbers told a story. At most Della's locations, the blue mug got requested maybe 40, 50 times a month. It was a poor neighborhood thing, a hard winter thing, and the company budgeted for it gladly. But in the entire eastern region, 11 stores, the blue mug had been requested a grand total of 0 times in 14 months. 0, not 1 free cup, in over a year across 11 stores in some of the hardest blocks in the state. That was not possible. That was not people stopping being poor. That was somebody making the free cup disappear. 11 stores. 1 regional manager. August had not gotten rich by ignoring numbers. He had also not stayed decent by trusting them too much. He spent the next 2 weeks doing something a man in his position almost never does, he read. He read every customer complaint filed against the Eastern region for 3 years, hundreds of them, late at night alone, with a glass of water and his mother's photograph on the desk. And a shape rose up out of all that paper. Cold staff. Humiliated customers. The phrase soup kitchen used by more than one employee quoting the same manager. A teenager fired for handing a sandwich to a man going through the trash out back. A pattern of people being made small over and over in stores that bore his mother's name. It made him sick. It made him ashamed. Because every one of those complaints had crossed somebody's desk at headquarters, and every one of them had been marked resolved, and nothing had ever changed. The man whose name was on the building had let it happen by looking at the wrong piece of paper. His name was Preston Vance. And here is the part August already knew. The part that made his jaw tighten when he saw it. Preston Vance was the nephew of Bradford Vance, Della's Coffee's chief operating officer. Bradford had hired the boy out of business school 4 years ago over the objections of 2 hiring managers. There had been complaints about Preston before. 3 of them, formal, filed by employees. All 3 had quietly gone away. The complaints were in the system 1 week and gone the next. Somebody upstairs was making them vanish, the same way somebody was making the free cup vanish. August could have fired Preston Vance with a phone call. He could have sent a team of lawyers and auditors with 1 email. But August Reed had learned something from his mother that no business school teaches. You don't find out who a man is by reading a report about him. You find out by sitting at his counter and ordering a cup of coffee while he doesn't know who you are. So that morning, August Reed did not put on the gray suit. He put on an old gray coat with a frayed cuff, a coat he'd kept from a long time ago, from the years before the money. He let 3 days of beard stay on his face. He told his head of security, a quiet former marshal named Dale, to park 2 cars around the corner and wait, and to come in for one reason only. If I send you a text, August said, it'll be 1 word. You'll know it when you see it. Until then, you don't exist. 2 black SUVs pulled to the curb on a side street off 8th at 8:02 that morning. The men inside cut the engines and waited. They were waiting for 1 word. Preston Vance did not know they were there. Preston Vance did not know a clock had just started counting down. Remember that. And August Reed walked into his mother's store in his frayed coat with $4 in his pocket and got in line like nobody at all. The first thing he noticed was the shelf. He noticed it before anything else, the way you notice your own name in a crowded room. The blue mug was there, the daisy, the chip, his mother's mug. 20 years gone, and there it sat, and for a second August Reed, billionaire, founder, the man whose signature was on 1,400 leases, had to stop and breathe because he was 8 years old again. Standing on a milk crate at a bus depot counter while his mother poured a free cup for a man with no shoes. The second thing he noticed was the woman behind the register. Older than him, straight-backed, an apron so crisp it looked new, though he could tell from the wear at the hem it was years old. She was serving an elderly man, and August watched her slide his change back across the counter with both hands, gently, the way you hand someone something precious. She called the old man by name. She asked about his sister's hip. The old man left smiling. August ordered a small coffee and a blueberry muffin. The coffee was $1.90. He paid with 2 ones and told her to keep the dime. And Pearl smiled and dropped it in a jar by the register that said, in handwriting, tips, split fare. He took his cup to the corner table by the window, sat down with his back to the wall the way careful men do, and he watched. For 20 minutes, he watched a woman run a coffee shop the way his mother used to. He watched her wave a young mother to a table and bring the coffee to her so the woman wouldn't have to wrestle the stroller through the line. He watched her quietly tell the young cashier beside her, a girl of maybe 19 named Danny by her tag, to give a shivering man at the end of the counter a hot cup and ring it as a blue mug. He watched the girl hesitate, glance nervously toward the back office, and do it anyway. And August Reed thought, in the warm light of his mother's first store, this is what I built it for. The numbers were wrong. The reports were wrong. Here it is, right in front of me. Alive, he was wrong. The morning was not over, because at 8:40 the door to the back office opened and Preston Vance walked out onto the floor. You could see what kind of man Preston Vance was from across the room. He was 31 years old and wore a watch worth more than Pearl made in 3 months. He walked through the cafe not looking at a single customer, the way a man walks through a room he believes belongs to him. He went straight to the register, lifted the lid on the tip jar, frowned and set it down. He looked at the screen, he scrolled, and then his face changed. "Who rang a blue mug?" he said. Not a question, a blade. The girl, Danny, went pale. There was a man, he was cold. How many times, Preston said, do I have to explain this to you children? He said the word children the way you'd flick something off your sleeve. We don't do that here. There is no blue mug at my stores. There is no free coffee. Do you understand what free means? It means I make less money, which means corporate likes me less, which means the next time there are cuts, it's your little job that goes. Is that what you want? It's company policy, Pearl said. Quiet, even, it's on page 1 of the handbook. Mr. Vance, the blue mug is the handbook, Preston said, and he laughed. He actually laughed. Sweetheart, I am the policy in this building. You want to know how things really work? Some old woman who started this company 100 years ago had a soft heart, and now we all have to pretend that her little charity habit is some kind of religion. It's not. It's a leak. It's money on the floor. And I am not in the business of pouring my margins down the throats of people who can't even afford $1.90 coffee. Go back and watch his face when he says that. Go back to that exact moment. Because at the corner table, the man in the gray coat had stopped chewing, and his hand, the one holding the muffin, had gone completely still, and Preston Vance, looking out at his floor, his cafe, his little kingdom, never once glanced at the corner. If he had, he might have seen it. He might have stopped. He didn't. People like that, Preston went on, warming up now, enjoying the audience. You give them 1 free cup and they come back every day with their hands out. That's not kindness. That's training a stray. You feed it, it never leaves. He turned to the shivering man at the end of the counter, the one Danny had served, and he said it right to his face. This isn't a soup kitchen. Move along. The man set down the hot cup, half full, and shuffled out into the cold. He didn't argue. People who have been spoken to like that their whole lives don't argue. They just go. A young father near the window pulled his little girl a few inches closer to him, instinctively, the way you do when something ugly walks too near a child. An older woman at the counter quietly put her own pastry back down, her appetite gone. Nobody said anything. That is the thing about a man like Preston Vance, he counted on the silence. He had built his whole little kingdom on the safe knowledge that no one in a coffee shop is going to risk their morning to defend a stranger. He was usually right. He was about to learn how expensive being usually right can be. And that, you would think, was the cruelty. That was bad enough. But the morning was not over, because Preston Vance, on a roll now, turned and saw the blue mug on the shelf. And another thing, he said. I have asked you twice to clean up this counter. It looks like a thrift store. What is this? He reached up and took the mug off the shelf, holding it between 2 fingers like it was diseased. Pearl moved toward him fast. Miss Vance, please, that doesn't belong to the store. It belongs in the trash, Preston said. Take that filthy thing off my shelf before I throw it in the dumpster myself. And then he opened his hand, and he let it drop, and the blue enamel mug that Della Mae Reed had scratched her initials into in 1974 hit the tile floor and broke into 3 pieces. The daisy cracked in half. Now we are back where we started. the frozen line, the girl with the phone, Pearl looking down at the pieces, and in the corner, very slowly, the man in the gray coat set down his cup. But there's a part you didn't see yet, because before August Reed stood up, before any of it, two cashiers started talking. Pearl and the girl, Danny and August, 3 tables away, heard every word. And what they said is the reason a 51-year-old man sat frozen in a coffee shop, unable to breathe. Preston had stalked back into his office, satisfied the broken pieces left on the floor. Pearl knelt down. She gathered the 3 pieces of the mug into her apron, gently, the way you'd gather something living that had been hurt. Danny crouched beside her near tears. "It's just a mug, Miss Pearl," Danny whispered, trying to comfort her. "We can get you another one." And Pearl shook her head, and she held the broken daisy in her palm, and she said something August Reed had waited his whole life to hear from a stranger. "No, baby," Pearl said. "You can't. There's no other one. I knew the woman who made this. I was there." August's hand stopped on the muffin. "You knew her?" Danny said. "I was 19, Pearl said, and her voice went somewhere far away. "Younger than you. I'd run off from a bad house with nothing but a paper bag of clothes, and it was December, and I was sitting in that old bus depot because the depot was warm and I had nowhere to be. And a woman at the coffee counter, Della, she watched me sit there 3 hours not buying anything. Because I had 80 cents, and I was saving it. And you know what she did? She didn't ask me one single question. She just put a cup down in front of me. Hot, and she said, 'Everybody gets a warm cup.' That's all. Those were the first kind words anybody had said to me in a month." Danny had gone very quiet. "She gave me that cup every day for 2 weeks, Pearl said. Then she gave me a job washing dishes. Then she taught me the register. She taught me everything I know about being decent to a person. I worked that depot counter beside Della Mae Reed for 11 years, and when she got sick at the end, I sat up with her in the hospital 3 nights running because she didn't have anybody else close by. Her boy was off building the company, and she wouldn't let me call him home, said he had work to do, said he'd done enough worrying over her his whole childhood." August Reed could not move. "And the last thing she ever said to me," Pearl went on, holding the broken daisy, she took my hand, and she made me promise. She said, "Pearl, when I'm gone, there's going to be 100 of these stores. 1,000, and people are going to forget what it was for. Promise me you'll keep the cup going. Promise me you'll keep handing out the warm cup, no matter who tells you to stop." And I promised her. I've been keeping that promise for 20 years. I dust that mug every morning. And I gave away the warm cup at this counter every single time somebody needed it. Even when that man in there docked my pay for it. Even when he wrote me up. Even the months I couldn't hardly pay my own rent. She closed her hand around the broken pieces. "Because I gave my word to a dying woman. And a person is only as good as their word." Now you have to understand what August Reed was hearing. He had spent 20 years believing he was the keeper of his mother's memory, that the company, the handbook, the warm yellow sign, that all of it was the way he carried her. And here was a woman he had never met, a woman making $1,290 a month who had sat up 3 nights with his dying mother while he was 200 miles away signing leases. A woman who had kept his mother's actual promise, in his mother's actual words, at his mother's actual counter for 20 years and had paid for it out of her own thin paycheck in silence, asking nothing, with no idea that the woman's son even existed in the world close enough to thank her. He had come to that store thinking he understood his mother's legacy. He had been carrying a photograph of it. Pearl Hutchins had been living inside it. And the man Della's son had hired, the man his own company protected, the man with the watch, had just smashed the last thing Della Mae Reed ever held in her hands, and called her life's work a charity habit, and told a freezing man to move along. In the corner of the store, August Reed wiped his eyes once with the back of his hand. He looked at the broken mug in Pearl's apron. He thought about a milk crate and a man with no shoes and 5 words. Everybody gets a warm cup. And then August Reed took out his phone and he typed one word, and he pressed send. The word was now. Around the corner, 2 car doors opened. August Reed stood up from the corner table. He was not a large man, and the coat was frayed, and the beard made him look tired and poor. So when he walked up to the register, Danny started to tell him gently that they were dealing with something and could he wait. And Pearl, still on her knees with the broken pieces, looked up at the shabby stranger with red eyes and the kind of patience that comes from a lifetime of being patient. "Ma'am," August said softly, "may I see the pieces?" "Please, just for a moment." Something in his voice. Pearl rose slowly and held out her apron. August reached in and lifted the broken bottom of the mug into the light. He turned it over, and there, scratched into the enamel with the point of a kitchen knife 40 some years ago, were 3 letters. D.M.R. Della Mae Reed. August read aloud, very quietly. "My mother." The store went silent in a different way than before. "Excuse me?" Pearl whispered. "Della Mae Reed was my mother," August said. He set the broken piece down on the counter as gently as if it could still hold coffee. "My name is August Reed. I built this company out of her 9 little shops. I named it after her. And I have been carrying her in a photograph for 20 years. His voice broke, just slightly. He looked at Pearl. "I didn't know she had someone with her at the end. I didn't know somebody kept her promise. I have been looking for the inside of my mother's heart for 20 years, ma'am, and it turns out it was right here, in your hands, the whole time." The girl Danny had her phone up now, and she was filming, and her hands were shaking. That was the moment the office door opened again. Preston Vance came back out onto the floor, irritated by the quiet, and he saw a shabby man in a frayed coat standing at his register holding broken garbage and talking to his cashier, and Preston Vance did what Preston Vance always did. He started toward the man fast, already talking. "Sir, I don't know what you think you're... This is a place of business we don't have time for. You need to take your trash and then Dale walked through the front door. Dale was 6'4" and wore a black suit and had the particular stillness of a man who used to wear a badge. Behind him came a second man in a suit, and behind that one, through the glass, you could see the 2 black SVs parked at the curb with their hazards on. Dale crossed the caf in 5 steps, stopped beside the shabby man, and said, clearly, in a voice that carried to every frozen customer in the room, "Mr. Reed, is there a problem here? Mr. Reed, you have to watch Preston Vance's face in that second. Some of you will rewind it." The color left him from the top down like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth was still open from the sentence he'd been saying, "Take your trash," and the sentence just died there. He looked at the shabby man, he looked at the giant in the suit who had just said the name Reed. He looked at the broken mug on the counter, the mug he had called a filthy thing 30 seconds ago, and the initials scratched into the bottom, D.M.R. And somewhere in the back of his expensive education a single fact arrived all at once and crushed him. Reed, Della's Coffee, the founder, the man whose name was on the building, in the frayed coat, at the corner table. The whole time, Preston's voice came out as a croak. "You're not, sir, there must be some, 40 minutes, August Reed said quietly. He was not shouting. He never once raised his voice, and the whole store leaned in to hear him, the way you always lean in toward the quiet man. Because in that room everyone understood now that the quiet man held all the power and had held it the entire time. "I have been sitting at that table for 40 minutes, Mr. Vance. I drank $1.90 coffee at my mother's counter. I watched you take a hot cup away from a freezing man and tell him to move along. I watched you tell that young woman there's no blue mug at your stores. I heard you call my mother's life's work, and I'm quoting you, so I want to make sure I have it right. A soft-hearted woman's little charity habit. A leak. Money on the floor." Preston had started to sweat. "Sir, that's out of context, I would never." And then August continued, and his voice dropped lower, which somehow made it louder. "You took the first cup my mother ever poured from, the cup she scratched her own initials into the year I was born, and you dropped it on the floor and called it filthy, while the woman who sat up 3 nights holding my dying mother's hand watched you do it. Pearl made a small sound and put her hand over her mouth. "You want to know the part that I can't forgive?" August said. "It's not the money. It was never the money. We can afford the free cups, Mr. Vance. We could afford 10 times as many. The part I can't forgive is the contempt. You looked at people who had nothing, the exact people my mother built this entire company to be kind to, and you decided they were beneath you. People like that, you called them. And every time you said it, you didn't know, you couldn't know that you were saying it about my mother. Because my mother was people like that once, so was that woman behind the counter. So was I. The store was utterly silent. The girl's phone kept filming. "You're fired," August Reed said. 2 words, effective this second. "Dale, would you walk Mr. Vance to his car? He is not to take anything from the office, because nothing in that office is his." "You can't." Preston's panic finally broke through. "My uncle is the COO. Bradford Vance. You can't just—" "I know exactly who your uncle is," August said. "We're going to be talking about your uncle very soon. 3 formal complaints against you in 4 years, Mr. Vance, and all 3 of them vanished out of our HR system within a week of being filed. Somebody with high-level access made them disappear. I'd very much like to find out who." He turned, for the first time, away from Preston, as if the man had already ceased to exist, and that, the turning away, was somehow the most final thing of all. "Goodbye, Mr. Vance." Dale put one hand lightly on Preston's shoulder, and Preston Vance, the man with the watch worth 3 months of Pearl's pay, walked out of the store he'd ruled an hour ago with his head down, past the 7 customers, past the empty stool where the freezing man had sat, out the door his founder had walked in through, and into the back of a car. He never set foot in Adela's again. But the reckoning was just beginning, because that girl Danny had filmed the whole thing. She didn't even mean to post it. She sent it to her sister first, just to say, "You won't believe my morning." Her sister posted it. By noon it had 4,000 views. By that evening it had 2 million. By the next morning, the video, 11 minutes long, the smashing of the mug, Pearl on her knees, the quiet man in the corner standing up, the words "people like that" and "everybody gets a warm cup," and the line that cut through the whole internet, "My mother was people like that once," that video had been watched 31 million times. They called it #the blue mug. It did not stay a video. It became a reckoning. Reporters found the freezing man Preston had told to move along. His name was Walter. He was 68. A retired bus mechanic who'd lost his pension in a company bankruptcy, and he wept on camera saying he'd only wanted to get warm. Strangers raised $40,000 for Walter in 2 days. Other employees from the eastern region came forward, dozens of them with the same story. Preston Vance had run those 11 stores like a private little empire of cruelty for 4 years, docking pay for free cups, humiliating staff, telling the poor to move along, and the complaints had always disappeared. And then a reporter pulled the thread August had handed her. And it led exactly where August knew it would. Bradford Vance, chief operating officer, had personally accessed the HR system on 3 separate occasions to delete formal complaints against his nephew. There were logs, there were timestamps. There was no version of the story where that was anything but what it was. The board met in emergency session. Bradford Vance resigned before they could vote, which spared the company a vote but spared Bradford nothing. His name was already in the video's wake, already attached to the words "cover-up" and "nepotism" in 31 million feeds. August Reed did not gloat. He did something better. He went on camera himself. No frayed coat now, just a plain man in a plain shirt. And he told the whole country the story of a coffee counter in a bus depot in 1974 and a woman with 80 cents and 5 words. He apologized. He said the rot had grown in his company because he had trusted reports instead of sitting at his own counters, and he would never make that mistake again. And then he announced the changes. The blue mug was no longer a policy buried on page 1 of a handbook that a regional manager could ignore. It became a public, audited, untouchable guarantee at every one of the 1,400 stores. A free cup, hot, no questions for anyone who asked, in honor of Della Mae Reed. Any manager who denied it would be terminated, and the founder published the rule with his own signature. So no nephew of no executive could ever again pretend he was the policy in the building. The company committed $2 million a year to it and dared anyone to call it money on the floor. Every employee in the eastern region who had been docked pay for honoring the blue mug was paid back, in full with interest. Pearl Hutchins's back pay alone. 20 years of small deductions for a promise she had kept to a dying woman came to $9,400. August Reed handed her the check himself. Pearl tried to refuse it. He would not let her. It was not all clean and quick. It rarely is. Preston Vance hired a lawyer and threatened to sue for wrongful termination. And for about a week the comment sections filled with people who said the founder had overreacted, that it was just a mug, that the manager was only trying to run a profitable store. There is always that week. There are always those people. But then the 11 SUVs of audit teams finished their work, and the company released, with Pearl's blessing, the full accounting across the eastern region. Over 4 years, exactly 0 free cups had been given in stores where company policy and the founder's own signature said they should have been given by the thousands. You cannot argue with 0. The lawsuit quietly went away. So did the people defending him. And the company kept going, past the firing, past the headlines, into the harder work that no camera films. August Reed flew to all 1,400 stores over the next year, not in a frayed coat now, openly, as himself, and he sat at every counter and ordered a $1.90 coffee and asked the people behind the register one question. When was the last time you gave someone the warm cup? He wanted to hear the number be more than 0. Almost everywhere it was. The places where it wasn't got a new manager and a visit from the founder who did not raise his voice, because by then everyone in the company understood that the quiet man holds all the power, and always had. But the checks and the firings and the trending hashtag, that's the kind of justice the world can see. The thing August Reed did next is the part that still gets people. The part you came for. 1 year later. 1 year later, the 8th Street store looked different. The little wooden shelf behind the register was still there. But now it held a glass case, and inside the glass case sat a blue enamel mug, the original, the 1974 mug, the daisy and the initials DMR, carefully, lovingly repaired. The 3 broken pieces fitted back together by a master restorer in gold seams, so that the cracks didn't disappear but shone. There is an old way of mending broken things where you don't hide the break, you fill it with gold, because the breaking is part of the history now, and the history is worth more than the unbroken thing ever was. That is what August Reed did with his mother's mug. He did not pretend it had never been dropped. He made the dropping into gold. Below the case, a small brass plaque read, "Everybody gets a warm cup." Della Mae Reed, 1949-2005, the 8th Street store had become the flagship of something new. August Reed had taken his mother's rule and built it into a foundation, the Della Reed Warm Cup Foundation. With $30 million of his own money to start, it didn't just give away coffee. It funded the things Della would have funded if she'd ever had more than 80 cents to spare, warming shelters in 11 cities, job training for people coming out of the exact kind of hard place Pearl had run from at 19, a fund that quietly paid the rent of working people one bad month away from the street. And the foundation needed a director, someone who understood in their bones and not from a report what the warm cup was actually for. August Reed offered the job to Pearl Hutchins. Pearl, who made $1,290 a month, who split her blood pressure pills in half, who wrote, "Be good, be kind, I'll be home" on a folded note more than 1,000 times. Pearl Hutchins became the director of a $30 million foundation built around the promise she had personally kept for 20 years. She moved out of the one-bedroom apartment with the fold-out couch. Her grandson Marcus did not sleep in the front room anymore. The Della Reed Foundation put Marcus through college. He is studying to be a nurse because, he said, his grandmother taught him that the whole point of being strong is to be gentle with people who can't fight back. The freezing man Walter became the foundation's first official greeter at the 8th Street store. He sits by the door in a green apron he irons himself, and when someone comes in cold and quiet and saving their last coins, Walter is the one who walks over and says the 5 words, and pours the cup, and tells them no questions, "Sit down, you're welcome here." Walter has poured, by the Foundation's count, more than 9,000 warm cups. 9,000 strangers who walked in on the worst morning of their lives and were met not with move along, but with everybody gets a warm cup. And every single morning before the store opens, in the dark, 10 minutes early, a woman named Pearl Hutchins still arrives first, the way she has for 23 years now. She walks past the glass case with the gold-mended mug, and she touches the glass once, lightly, with the corner of her apron, and then she gets to work. Because a promise to a dying woman doesn't end when the world finally notices. It just finally gets the help it always deserved. That's the story. But before you go, I want to ask you something. If this story moved you, if you felt something when that woman knelt down to gather the broken pieces of a promise the powerful had thrown on the floor, then do me a small favor. Like this video, share it with one person who needs to remember that kindness is not weakness, and subscribe and tap the bell so the next story finds you too. And here's my question, and I really do want your answer in the comments. Have you ever been the person who got the warm cup when you had nothing? Or have you ever been the one who poured it? Tell me. I read them. But here's what really gets me. Here's the part I keep coming back to, long after the video ends. It would have been so easy for Pearl Hutchins to stop. 20 years, docked pay, write-ups, a boss who called her a child and called the dead woman's life's work a charity habit. No one was watching. No one was ever going to know. The founder was 200 miles away. There was not a single earthly reason for a woman with $190 of slack a month to keep handing out free coffee that cost her, personally out of her own thin pocket, for 2 decades. For nothing. Except a promise. Except her word to a woman who was already gone and could never check. Pearl kept it anyway, in the dark, for free. Because that is who she was when no one was looking, and the whole point of this story, the thing the smashed mug and the gold seams are really about, is that who you are when no one is looking is the only self you actually have. Preston Vance was one man to the people above him and another man entirely to the people below him. Pearl Hutchins was exactly the same woman in an empty store at 5:40 in the morning as she was in front of 31 million people. That's the difference. That was always the difference. So here is my real question for you. And I'd be grateful if you'd sit with it for a second before you answer. When no one is watching you, no boss, no camera, no one who could ever find out, who are you to the people who can't do a single thing for you in return? Are you the man who says move along, or are you the one who pours the cup? Tell me the truth in the comments. I'll be reading every one.